Well, welcome around the Workstand. It is June, halfway through the year. Ryan, do you feel like you're closer to 2050 than you are 2000?
Yes, and it's July, so you're caught in a time warp.
We're going to talk about June numbers.
We're going to talk about June numbers. Yeah.
It's July.
Do we leave this in and highlight that, like, the world is this crazy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody is perfect. Yeah, between the two of us, we are about as far away from perfect as possible.
Yeah. We're good examples. Things happen.
No, I can't believe it. And who is it? Which one of the late night shows? I think it's Jimmy Kimmel does a super cut of local news channels doing things like, "Can you believe it's July? I can't believe it's July," because it's such a trope. But I can't believe it's July. Like, the year's almost halfway done.
Yeah, and that is a real stat. We are closer to 2050 than we are the year 2000.
Wow, mind-boggling. Have you also, like, I think you're on Instagram too. Do you ever get those, like, reels, saying things like when you were in high school, the movie Dazed and Confused, if that happened today, it would have been like the early 2000s. Makes me feel so old.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, and we have to make the best of times. And you've done that. You came to town recently and hung out with some Workstanders in person. How was that?
Yeah, it was great. And yeah, so since we went fully remote, we still have like a center of gravity on the Front Range of Colorado, and so I try to make it up there every couple of months when the snow's not falling, because I'm not a huge fan of the cold. But it was great. Yeah, we did 3 events. We did a Doggy happy hour, coffee, and then a mountain bike ride. So a little something for everybody. It was great to see a bunch of people. And then People for Bikes, they have an office in downtown Boulder, and they very generously let me use it. It's a super cool hip space. So I worked from there, got to hang out with that crew, and then had a couple of like in-person brainstorm sessions. And, virtual works really well, but there's nothing quite like seeing folks.
Yeah, both is good.
Both is good. Yeah. I like the flexibility. I mean, I'm not going to complain about being able to go, ride my backyard trails middle of the day. Yeah.
Well, good. I want to talk about something that, because we tend to talk about results a lot, but there's an article coming in Brain that's got some interesting things that included us a bit around our parts around scheduling and tools within our tools.
Yeah.
What's up with that, and what else is that article about?
Well, I've been really happy that Brain as a whole has really started to focus more on the tools of successful retail, and so they're putting together a whole series of articles focusing on the technology that's available to shops. And the first one's around service scheduling, and so did an interview with Ray Keener. Told him all about how our tool works and how it's differentiated from others. And it'll be really interesting to see how he stacks them all up. But, I think what comes out of ours is that it's, it just gives customers such a predictable interface. They're used to when they drop off a car or even schedule like a hair appointment. You and I don't necessarily have hair appointments, but for those that do, you're used to being able to go online and schedule a time. But one thing that distinguishes us is, and this, that when we were building that, our customers told us loud and clear that they were not comfortable with consumers picking what they thought they needed for a repair. So, a consumer might select a deluxe tune-up or a basic tune-up, but they don't really know that they, need new tires or a new chain. And so that created a sense of confusion. And so we built exactly what our customers asked for. It's a drop-off tool. Super easy to use and is included, which is nice. And I think a lot of listeners don't recognize how many things are included in a Workstand subscription. It's not just websites. There's a lot of functionality baked in there.
Yeah, I talk about that too a lot, because it's some folks are always just going to walk in the front door of the store with their bike and think they can just drop it off, and some folks are always going to call. But more and more, another class of consumer wants to be able to do what you said. They just want to go to a website, click, and be done. And they want it to be simple.
Yep.
It just can't be complicated.
And fast. Like, people want to be in and out of places. And they want the predictability of saying, I'm going to show up at this time. There's going to be a service rider waiting. I'm going to be in and out. And of course they understand that. Like, yes, there's going to be a full estimate that's provided after it's reviewed. That's what they're used to with auto repairs and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and they can users can set up a few different basic drop-offs if they want to have checkboxes for that.
Yep.
But it leaves a lot of room. And then the Workstand IQ staff scheduling, I really think more stores ought to look at that because it's so much of staffing is just guesses and so much of staffing is buddies. You know, your buddy wants some hours, and this really can take a lot of the guesswork out of it and base your staffing on historical sales and what you should expect. And generally that saves an awful lot of money every year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And it ties it to, financial results. I mean, it really helps you calculate your payroll budget relative to sales, not just finding time slots for people. So it's I agree. I think it's an underutilized feature within Workstand that I hope people take a look at.
For sure. And then there's more NBDA stuff going on. You've got you hosted a webinar. Were you involved in that, or was it just something that you?
No, I
watched?
just attended. I mean, NBDA is crushing it right now. They're just putting out so much content, just in the form of their podcasts or webinars. But they did a state of the industry webinar a week or so ago with, just a rock star panel like Bill Schumann from QBP, Bob Markovicius from Specialized, Paul from Rider Bikes, one of our clients, Matt Moore from People for Bikes. And it was basically just what's the state of affairs in the industry, wholesale inventories, retail inventories, pricing, what the environment is like in Asia around production or assembly, and then assessments on kind of what does a shop need to do to succeed today to really, because obviously the industry is very focused on sell through. How do we get product into consumers' hands? So learned a lot about, more of the production and import side, which was really good. But it was also pretty gratifying that whereas our name wasn't mentioned, all of the strategies that these experts talked about line up perfectly with what we do. They really had a strong sense that having a digital presence for shops was just crucial because that's where customers are when they're shopping. And frankly, an e-commerce presence, I think that, there's still a lot of uncertainty amongst the retail base on the role e-commerce can play in their business. But these speakers were pretty loud and clear about the value of it, but also recognizing the necessity of it relative to suppliers going more direct to consumer. But they had a couple of phrases. I think Bob, especially from Specialized, he's very good at like slogan-y or whatever creative turns of phrases. But he had one that said winning retailers will blend the convenience of online shopping with the personal engagement only available in person. So like just really acknowledging that there's something distinguishes the bike shop, but they're also like digital and physical work together. So revenue grows on both ends. And so that's the other piece is it's not just about driving in-store traffic. It's all about revenue growth, and it's just another category. So anyway, I got a lot out of it. And there's a recording on YouTube. So if anybody hasn't seen it, go check it out. And I'll also put in my plug for the NBDA. Like if you're not a member, give it a go. It's not expensive. You're supporting a great organization, and you're going to pick up some info. You get a lot for it. And they need your support. A stronger dealer base feeds on itself. We all need to get better.
Yeah. That's not always been the case. I mean, NBDA has always been a good organization, but in the last few years, they're really pushing great content out and really helping retailers grow their business in ways they wouldn't otherwise think of, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not saying I listen to every podcast episode, but they've got a great lineup of guests. Like if you want to know how the industry thinks, they have retailers, suppliers, technology partners. It's a window into the industry that nobody else is providing.
I agree. I'll put a link to the NBDA YouTube channel in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, you could just scroll down and click that. So results are what we generally talk about on these visits. So we got our June numbers. How was June?
Yeah, we got two sets of data to talk about. We got the Workstand data, which is for June, which is according to you is current month, but most of the world thinks it's previous month.
What is time?
This is great. I need something more than coffee. Um, but yeah, so we have the overall platform numbers for Workstand. Still showing year over year growth as a platform, but it is down. Like March and April were so strong. The whole platform was up over 25% in those 2 months, which, we've generally speculated was consumers trying to get ahead of higher prices. So the summer has softened, but still showing growth. I think most dealers would be happy if 2025 is showing something in the positive. So really pleased with that. Now, flip side of that is we also pay pretty careful attention to what we define as the typical dealer. We pull the high performers out. And when you remove those, the typical dealer was slightly down. And I think that reflects some of what I'm hearing from in-store business. So online is maybe paralleling in-store a little bit more. But I think what's important to note is the high performers in the online space, it isn't purely a size game. So like in the physical space, you might say, I've got one location and my competitor has 3 locations. Obviously, they're going to sell more than I do. With Workstand, that doesn't have to be the case. If you use the tools to their fullest, you can be a high performer. You can do 15, 20% of your total revenue online, at full price, selling out of other people's inventory. So I want that gap to be shrinking over time. And I know that's a big part of what you do is get more dealers engaged with marketing services and Google ads. I mean, that's the path. Yeah. Beyond the sales front, traffic was slightly down, which is new, for really even through sales declines, post COVID, traffic was steadily performing really, really well. The number of consumers visiting sites, which has historically been a really good indicator of demand. Consumers are shopping, but the search landscape's changing. There's a rise in what's called zero-click searches. Google is serving up so much information, answering consumer questions about where to ride, bicycle repair, location information, product availability, pricing. It's all right when you do your search. So there is less of a need to click through to a website to necessarily learn more. So that is likely influencing some of that traffic data. Looking at the Google search index, search is still strong, but we're going to have to monitor that over time to see how does that change. Yeah.
I do think the zero click, the generative AI results at the top, that does, I think, impact more the non-product searches. So that has something to do with non-catalog pages. If you got a page about service or a page about bike packing. But that generative AI source comes from somewhere. So it's still good to have that on your site, particularly once you've got somebody on the site so they can find that information. But I think it really doubles down on this fact that the last few years, product searches have outpaced the non-product searches. So the bike shop near me stuff isn't as prevalent as it was before. And that just really goes back to, we've really been focused on Google ads, product-focused ads a lot, because that isn't being taken by generative AI or displaced any. So keep that in mind too. Not only do we want the organic benefit of products on the website, but we also want to take advantage of those tools. Google's guiding us there, and Google's who we have to pay to get there, but they work.
Absolutely.
And that gets traffic in store and gets them on your site so they can see that other content. So this is a game of balance. Marketing always is. And right now, the balance is we need to have that product information in front of your customers to really leverage that.
Yeah, you made good points there. AI needs someplace to learn, and so that's why you need to have an effective website. And B, consumers are searching for products. Google's incentivized to show local retailers' products to the consumers, and so that is still of tremendous value. Diving into some categories, that's something obviously, as dealers are making stocking choices, really worth noting and kind of benchmarking yourself against, overall numbers. But, in the analog category, online, The categories that showed growth were gravel, full suspension, and BMX, which reflects the overall number. And as a reminder, most of those are for, buy online, pick up in store. Electric bikes were up in every single category. And, pricing, both in terms of discount and the type of bike customers are buying, has led to some fluctuation in average selling price and total revenue. But unit sales year over year are nearly double what they were last year. And so that is key. And then in the aftermarket space, there were some really positive signs around things like helmets and shoes selling really well. I see that as shops are staying really competitive in these when consumers are shopping online, but also a good sign that people are riding their bikes.
Do you think, two questions. One goes back a few bullet points, but anytime there's a spike in sales, that can surprise some people in terms of the amount of cash it takes to deal with that bump in sales. So I have heard a few stores, but not many, talk about cash flow lately. They seem like that bump in sales was not so great that it caused a cash problem. And then it did put some cash in the business at some point once that flushed out. Have you heard anything about cash flow, or dealers are worried about their cash position? Or are we still in a pretty good shape from the pandemic push of, big sales for a year and a half, 2 years?
I'm hearing a lot of cash flow concerns. I think a lot of our customers have run their inventories about as lean as they feel that they can. They've run their staff about as lean as they can. And when sales are just barely meeting modest growth expectations or falling a little short, I think there's some concern. Now, I think that concern manifests itself as people kind of play it out and they do their cash flow projections, especially if you're in a seasonal market. You're asking yourself, am I bringing in enough to be able to navigate the winter months? But I wish it wasn't the case. But I'd say generally the conversations that I have, and how about you? I mean, can you characterize what you shared?
Well, I haven't heard it as much as I thought I would. Anytime we have such a big April and May, 60 days of really big sales, that causes a cash crunch because you've got to pay for that inventory, get more inventory in, you got to collect that money. It just takes a bit of time. But I haven't heard as much as I thought I would. So I'm not surprised that you have, because I would have thought I'd heard more.
I think that probably speaks. I know you have a lot. You start your conversations around how's business, where do you see the growth opportunity at? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes that's the exclusive reason for my call, is to be checking in on business. But the other part that's worth noting, and we're going to chat a little bit about, like, the overall April numbers, for total retail have come in from People for Bikes, and whereas online we were up 25% in April, total retail was virtually flat. And so, from what I've heard from dealers, they weren't able to participate in that lift to the same extent that our data, signaled. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably what I'm encountering.
Yeah. Okay. My second thing, gear has improved dramatically, always does over time. But when I look at those numbers where, helmet sales were good, but I think I saw somewhere that, things like chains are down. And so, as we've talked recently, I'm enamored with the event Unbound in Kansas. And 10 years ago, to get through that event, 200 miles of chunky flint, sharp rocks without a flat would be unheard of. It was how many flats you were going to have, not. And now it's common, because tire technology's gotten so much better. I wonder this, I don't know if we can answer this question, but it seems to me, I wonder if the improvement in things like chains, because chains wear better. There's different technology for lubing the chain and keeping them in better shape. Clearly tires are better. Could that be affecting aftermarket sales in some way? Maybe we've done too good a job as an industry improving the technology and the products.
I've told you this before, but our longtime customer, Penn Cycles, Bill Randon, who was their GM, one of his turns of phrase was, "My biggest competitor is myself from 20 years ago." Meaning, if you sell high quality products, they're going to hit the secondary market. So you're right. That is a blessing and a curse. We sell great products, but it also means that the replenishment cycle can be stretched. So I think you're exactly right. But I'm going to supplement that with, I think consumers are probably going to try and stretch things out a little bit more. I think that, overall retail spending is tightening up a little bit this year. I think we've been pleased, not just in bike, but just looking broadly. Retail performance has been matching, I'll say, Wall Street forecasts, but I think, some of us were expecting more of a downturn. But it hasn't been going gangbusters. And I think there's signals that consumers are shifting down to lower priced stores, lower priced items. And so I can imagine them saying, I'm going to hold off on replacing that chain right now. But it's interesting. I think when we look at the overall numbers, service revenue for shops is up 11%, but things like chains and brake pads, aren't growing. And so I'd really be interested to know whether our customers are seeing that at the service writing desk. They're selling the service, but our customers less hesitant to replace that chain that's like on the edge, but not worn out yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or maybe they're just being, good stewards of their customers' money, and brake pads last longer and chains last longer, and they're recognizing that.
Yeah.
Hard to say. All right. Well, that's our numbers, and you alluded to the April numbers that come out of the IBD channel from People for Bikes. What were those numbers relative? You already spoke a little bit about it. Relative to us, it's a little down, but is there more to know about those numbers?
And it was generally flat across both. They measure rest of market, which is the big box stores and online, and then IBD. Essentially flat with barely any fluctuation between those two markets. But they acknowledge in their report that they pay careful attention to our data. We participate with their business intelligence hub, and historically we've been a signal of a directional signal for where the market's going. And so the fact that there has been a downward trend from our high point in April, they're expecting the same thing overall. So I'm sure retailers, at this point, they already have their May, June numbers, and they can say whether or not they've been performing well. But I already highlighted a real strength was service department. Service, up 11%. That's a big deal. Similar to our numbers, top bike categories were in the electric space, and mostly I'm just going to say around town, what People for Bikes qualifies as transit and leisure and cargo. Those were all up. And then electric road bikes also showing great growth. And so that's exciting that category is opening up. And then in the analog space, similar to ours, gravel, mountain bikes showed the best growth. Those categories are growing. And then again, BMX sales. And everybody loves seeing BMX sales. That is, when I was, back in my day, in 1994, my first shop job, you had that first wave of a BMX boom encountering the mountain bike boom, and that was great for business. And so, does this mean that BMX sales are strong now? But do you have a generation of riders that are going to be hitting the stores for the types of bikes that they might use on? I hate to call them adult because a lot of adults race BMX, but
sure, because grown-ups ride BMX.
But you got a generation of youth coming up that may be into cycling, and I think that's real positive.
Yeah, cool. Well, I don't know. I still there's not it's not gangbusters, but it's not. If you look at the whole from what we saw in April and May. And it's coming down, but you look at it across a season. I think there's still positives to take from that. So, and I'm still hearing some positives, particularly around stores investing in the digital side of things to make sure they round out their offering. Because I don't want to be too stark about this, but if you don't have a good digital presence, you really don't have a full business these days. And there's always been something like that in business. It might have been the phone book at some point. It might have been the old business directory at some point, but you have to have that full picture. Good local retail, good space, good staff, and now good digital presence. I want to tell a little story. Sometimes when budgets get tight, some of our clients want to downgrade to a lower package, and we have local and pro. We have these different levels for reasons because they fit different businesses well. And But when somebody does want to downgrade from pro to local, I'll say, okay, that's good. You're going to save this much money per month, but watch out for what that costs, because this is how you win searches today. This is how your customers shop with you instead of having to go somewhere else to the brand site or to a marketplace. Watch that. And one of the most stark examples ever was on June 30th, and it really was June. That happened, and they went, we understand, but we need to try this for budget reasons. On July 2nd, the phone call came. It took one day, July 1st, to see the difference in store traffic and phone calls and orders on their website, and they came right back to pro. And that was always the case before COVID. During COVID, it was harder to see that because everybody wanted everything. It's interesting that now we've come back to that where it really has this direct and immediate impact. So think about that from the standpoint of, we understand budgets, and we understand that our service costs money. We always strive to make sure we're offering the value so that it feels like an investment that it is rather than a cost. But pay attention to those big things because they do make a difference. And if you save a couple of $100 in a month on a subscription, but it costs you 4 or 5 or 6 bike sales, that's not a good deal.
Not at all. And you highlighted, growth by category. We talk about, which bike, bike sales overall are doing X, but then you isolate certain categories, they're doing X plus 1. You could say the same thing about in-store and online. So like you said in that example, a decrease in foot traffic, but also a decrease in order volume. So, when we were looking at the data, we compared June Workstand results, and then we talked about April market results. If we go back to Workstand data in April, the typical dealer was up 8% online. And so, if they're flat total, 8% growth online, it's the category that is posting growth. And so if you're a current customer, how do you capitalize on that? But if you don't have an e-com presence, what are you going to do? You're going to make your floor stocking strategies based on what's growing. You got to make your channel strategies based on it too.
Yeah. Makes sense when you say it that way. Well, I like it. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for laughing at me when I got the months wrong, but it's busy.
It's always good to see you, Mark. Thanks for making the time.
You too, Ryan. See you next week, and we'll see you around the Workstand.